West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The call came into the Vermont Secretary of State's office on December 1st. It was 4 weeks after Election Day last year. The man on the phone was apparently fixated on one of the election conspiracy theories that was pushed by President Trump and his allies. I'm going to actually play you the audio of the voicemail that he left there. It is unpleasant tape. It's disturbing. It's a little bit scary. That's not the kind of thing you want to hear right now. This is your chance to mute. We're going to play it. The voicemail lasts about 40 seconds. Here it is.
You are done. This might be a good time to put a pistol in your mouth and pull the trigger if you are any part of this fraud. Do you understand? Do you realize there's a reason we just brought back the firing squad? No more painless lethal injection. From now on, the firing squad or poison gas, both are torturous deaths. If you are in on this shit, let me tell you what, your days are numbered. That was one of 3 threatening messages like that left for Vermont election officials in November and December of last year, all left by the same man. We know that because of detailed new reporting from Reuters, reporters Linda So and Jason Zepp. According to interviews and records that Reuters obtained, state police in Vermont looked into the matter and determined that the number this guy was calling from was, quote, essentially untraceable. The reporters write, quote, police didn't pursue a case on the grounds that the caller didn't threaten a specific person or indicate an imminent plan to act. State police never spoke with the caller. Reuters did. Quote, reporters connected with him in September on the phone number police had called untraceable. In 5 conversations over 4 days spanning more than 3 hours, the man acknowledged threatening Vermont officials and described his thinking. And these Reuters reporters didn't just speak to this one Vermont guy who left those threatening messages like that. They actually tracked down and interviewed a total of 9 different people responsible for making threatening communications targeting elections officials, 6 of them across 4 different states. All of the 9 people Reuters tracked down happily owned up to having left these threats. As Reuters puts it, quote, most were unrepentant. This is a new piece of remarkable reporting from Reuters, but it's the latest in a series they have done, highlighting the increasing extreme harassment and threats of violence that have been directed at even low-level elections officials since last year's presidential election. Back in June, Reuters published a blood-curdling report on the barrage of violent threats and physical intimidation directed at elections officials and also just volunteer election workers. The headline on that episode in this series was, Trump-inspired death threats are terrorizing election workers.
Subheadline on that piece did not mince words. Quote, election officials and their families are living with threats of hanging, firing squads, torture, and bomb blasts, interviews and documents reveal. The campaign of fear was sparked by Trump's voter fraud falsehoods. It threatens the U.S. electoral system. That was the first in the series. Reuters says it has now documented nearly 800 intimidating messages to elections officials in 12 different states, including more than 100 that legal experts say could warrant prosecution because they could put a reasonable person in fear of bodily harm or death. But troublingly, this latest instance of Reuters reporting on this issue includes the fact that law enforcement's response to this very widespread and intense campaign of intimidation has been really anemic. And so the reporters Linda So and Jason Zepp decided that they would track down some of these callers themselves, in large part because the police seem to have never bothered. One stay-at-home dad and part-time Lyft driver in Arizona became convinced that Barack Obama and George Soros had packed ballot boxes with fake ballots from China. He left expletive-filled messages for Arizona's Secretary of State saying that she would hang from a tree. Georgia real estate investor saw a presentation from Rudy Giuliani on supposed election fraud in Georgia. He left a voicemail for the Fulton County elections director telling him that he had, quote, better run because he would be hung or he would face firing squads. A 42-year-old night staffer who worked at a youth treatment center in Utah. He says his anger boiled over after he watched an election conspiracy event hosted by the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell. This Utah man, the one who works at the youth treatment center, he messaged Colorado's top elections official and told her, quote, I know where you sleep. I see you sleeping. Be afraid. Be very afraid. I hope you die. That was sent by a real person who's findable, traceable. Reuters called him. Reuters spoke with 9 of these folks. All but one of them were happy to go on the record by name with Reuters, admitting to their calls, saying that they believe they hadn't done anything wrong, saying the elections officials deserved these threats. And most of the people Reuters spoke to, part of the reason they're so cocky about having done this and they're not running from it is because there's been no consequences for them. Most of them have never heard from the police about what they did, even though elections officials alerted law enforcement about their messages and forwarded them all the information that Reuters was able to use to find these people. As for the Vermont guy, the one whose voicemail we just played, the one who Reuters contacted on the phone number police said was untraceable, the Vermont guy told Reuters journalists that thousands of fake ballots were cast in Arizona. He referred to the Dominion conspiracy theory. He said members of the media would soon be executed. Perpetrators of election fraud would be sent to military prison. And then he started threatening the Reuters journalists. They say that he sent them dozens of texts and voicemails over the course of several weeks. Less than a month ago, he left them a new threatening voicemail. He left a new threatening voicemail with the Vermont Secretary of State's office. He said some election staffers and the 2 Reuters reporters were, quote, about to get effing popped. But he didn't say effing. And you would think, you know, surely there must be some kind of investigation now, right? After all the earlier calls from this Vermont guy and the police saying, oh, this guy's untraceable. Reuters found it very easy to trace him, or at least they were able to trace him. They talked to him. Even after they talked to him about the threats, he started up the threats again and then started threatening the reporters as well. It's all documented. The Reuters reporters know who the guy is. They've been able to find him. There's no sense in which his phone was untraceable. But apparently Vermont State Police, again, declined to investigate. And the FBI won't say whether they're looking into it, although the Bureau did tell Reuters it takes such acts seriously. They said they work with other law enforcement agencies to, quote, identify and stop any potential threats to public safety and, quote, investigate any and all federal violations to the fullest. It's a nice general, statement of purpose. Joining us now is Reuters senior editor Jason Zepp, who reported this remarkable story today along with his colleague Linda So. Mr. Zepp, thank you so much for joining us and congratulations on this reporting. It's really important.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for having me.
My sense from your reporting is that there hasn't been much law enforcement response to these threats to election officials, even when election officials have documented them and handed everything over to law enforcement in a fairly careful way. You outline this quite serious case in Vermont where the Vermont State Police seem to be completely disinterested. But it seems like that's a pattern that you and your colleagues have been able to discover.
Yeah, no, it surprised us. I mean, we reached out first. In June, the DOJ launched a task force to gather election threats from Secretary of State's offices and local election offices across the country. We kind of did the same thing. We went out and gathered threats from election officials across the country, particularly in the battleground states. And then we went through them. We looked at the severity of them. We gathered about 800 of these, and then we looked at the severity of them, and we narrowed down and sort of doubled down around the most severe threats, the kind that legal experts said could be prosecuted in court. And then we went out, set up to really track down the people who were making these threats. We wanted to try to understand their motivations, try to understand their thinking. And when we spoke to them, we were really surprised that none of them had any contact at all with law enforcement.
In terms of the gentleman in Vermont with whom you spoke, we played a voicemail that he had left at the Vermont Secretary of State's office, obviously very threatening. And you and your colleagues detail the way that state police explained why they didn't follow that up. It was specifically laid out in your reporting, however, that the police also said basically that they couldn't find him, that they found that his phone number was untraceable and that they couldn't locate him. That seemed to be part of at least their initial explanation for why they weren't pursuing this matter, despite how threatening it was and how alarmed the officials at the Vermont Secretary of State's office were when they received these threats. Did you have to do any magic jujitsu, Sherlock Holmes wizardry in order to find this guy? Do you know why the state police believed he was untraceable?
When we did our records request, to the Secretary of State's office, they gave us the threats, they gave us the voicemails, and with that, they gave us the phone number. Really all we did was call that number.
Wow.
And the individual, when we first contacted him, he just basically hung up. He swore at us, but then we called him again and again and again. And actually, it was only the second time that we called him. He really started opening up to us. And then over the course of a number of days, we spoke with him in a sort of multiple interviews that went on for, I think, in total over 3 hours. We talked with him and really got a sense of, he wouldn't reveal his identity, his name, but we got a good sense of what was driving him, and he admitted to making the threats. And then at a certain point, as we discuss in the story, he kind of turned on us as well.
It is Wednesday, the 10th of November of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Will no one? Well, subpoenas keep a-flying. We'll see if they are honored, and if they aren't, how will they be enforced? How many sergeant of arms does the House have? That's my question, because I don't think we're going to get much help from the DOJ. I don't think we're going to get much help from law enforcement, period, as evidenced by the Rachel Maddow clip at the top. Who the cops called untraceable, Reuters was able to trace and then interview for hours and hours. The cops weren't able to, well, that's what the cops said. They couldn't find them. Okay, we know what they mean by that. You don't investigate your own kind, apparently. Yeah. And when I say your own kind, I mean fellow travelers. You don't have to necessarily be a cop now. Look at that 17 turned 18-year-old kid. He's one of them. After he had killed 2 people, he walked down the middle of the street with his gun, and everybody is yelling, chasing him and yelling to the cops. He just shot 2 people dead. Cops gave him water. Here, have some water. Or maybe the water came before, but you know what I mean. If there was an open Burger King, they would have gotten him a Whopper with cheese. Here, come along with us. Jeez. And now he's ostensibly a hero like that Ashley Babbitt. Okay, I do remember Spiro Agnew. I know you remember him, but the kiddies don't. They don't even know who he is. How could they remember him? They weren't even born. But anyway, Spiro Agnew said this country is going to move so far to the right, you won't recognize it. And you have to be old enough like us to be able to know what he means, because it is unrecognizable now, isn't it? Unless we were so old that we saw what it was like in the 20s and 30s for black people. Okay, well, the great experiment sometimes has some bad viruses getting into it. Yep. Well, lots more news in the news other than just indictments coming down. Though, I'm sorry, in subpoenas. I want the indictments too. The only concern that I do have with the sheer volume of subpoenas being issued, because there's going to be more, is that it seems like it would give each and every one of those individuals subpoenaed entreaty to, well, stall the machine, muck up the works, do what Trump and his team have always done. Jeez. I mean, look what happened with McGahn. Look what happened with McGahn. I'll say that slower. Over a year before they finally, court decided, oh yeah, he's got to testify. All right. So it's a little funny also how certain things get fast-tracked for appellate and Supreme Court review in hours or days for some things, and others, like Bannon, languish for about a month. Okay, it's 20 days. Better part of a month. No fast track on that. Boy, I guess this isn't Watergate. They really fast tracked that stuff back then because that was the norm. Oh, well, we have to treat this like every other common sort of offense. Is it a common offense to overthrow the United States of America? Usurping the peaceful transition of power through a violent act of occupation where people died. And for people to die, that means a lot of people got injured too. Let's be clear. All right. So, we got that Paul Gosar, that Nazi crazy guy, threatening the life of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I was thinking, this isn't like something serious. The reason that they're not going to get rid of Gosar, kick him out, because he didn't really do anything serious. I mean, serious is when you fake that you're going to fondle a starlet's breast on a USO tour when you were a comedian long before you were ever a senator. That's enough to get you out of there, because that's serious. Threatening the life of a fellow legislator. Hey, did you notice also another little tidbit in the news that wastewater, sanitation facilities are going to be tracked for COVID? I was wondering, why were sewage plants not part of the plan in the very beginning? They should have had epidemiologists at the sewage plants taking samples. I mean, that's just core. That's so obvious. And apparently there were a few scientists who were dissuaded from doing that in the beginning. Of course, this was during the Trump administration, where they didn't want competent people. Yeah, that kid McAtee, one of those being indicted. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Issued a subpoena. Little deputy president. Yeah, he was a mini Mussolini, apparently. Okay. You can make all sorts of jokes that, because he was a football player in college and, got hit on the head a few times. I don't think so. I don't think that you become a right-winger simply by having your head bashed around. In practice, too. It's not just the games. People forget. It's not the games where people get their concussions. It's all the little ones during practices. I don't say practice, practices. So you can't blame it on that. So, you got that guy running around, firing every competent person involved. Because if you're competent, generally you think, well, my loyalties lie to not only doing a good job, but making sure that it's for the benefit of the American people. Oh, no, we don't do that anymore. We're just doing everything for Don. And they did. And this guy was instrumental in it. Little purge right there at the end in the waning days of the Trump term. Yeah, we have a story coming up about that. Yes. So, what do we do with it? Will we have a DOJ that enforces these subpoenas? Now, on the other hand, to give Garland and the rest of the DOJ the benefit of the doubt, this is not the Barr DOJ. This is not the Sessions DOJ. This is not the big dick toilet guys DOJ. Remember him? Whenever they talk about AGs, they never talk about that guy. The big dick toilet guy. Yeah, that's where the Trump administration was. Yeah, we remember Sessions and we remember Barr. No one remembers the big dick toilet guy. Anyway, it's none of those. This is the Garland DOJ. And I think that they're going back to the tried and true strategy of not talking about investigations while they're going on. And I got to say, generally by Dana, the fact that they say they can't talk about it, that means there's one going on. Okay? Just saying. Now, they might be sly and say it one way or the other. Well, there's not really one going on, but we don't talk about that. Actually, they don't talk. They never say they don't talk about investigations that are not going on, because they talk about that all the time. Oh no, we don't have anything open on that. So usually, when an open investigation is enforced, you not only prevent any of your spokespeople from talking about it, including the titular head of the DOJ, the AG. But also, I think that there's a bit of concern about how much they want to give to Congress, because once they give that to Congress, that's pretty much evidence that the DOJ cannot bring into court. We have to be clear about that. They have to be very careful about what is in the congressional investigation, because when it goes to a court, there's a different set of protocols in how evidence is produced. So I think that is part of the equation as well, and I wish the media would talk about that, because that was one of the things that they did learn about Watergate, that if things had gone, well, things did go to criminal indictment and trial, and people went to jail. But there was lots and lots and lots of evidence that could not be presented in the criminal trial because it had already been divulged and adjudicated during the congressional investigation. So I wouldn't get too upset about the supposed snail pace on these insurgents, while what we know about these insurgents and their travail through our court system. Or not, because some of them are getting some sweetheart deals. What's that all about? Anyway, I would still be a little bit more patient. I think there's more in the hopper than we give Garland credit for. And it still doesn't look good for any of them. Who knows what they're going to do with Bannon? I keep reminding people that Bannon was kicked out of Italy because the Italian fascists said Bannon was even too fascist for them. He wanted to build a fascist school in a palace, a castle on a mountaintop in Italy. They said, no way, get out of here. Fascist slob. And they put the emphasis on slob, too. Can't have that around Italy. All right. We do have a curated show for you, of course. And so why don't we apprise ourselves of what is coming up on the curated part of the show here on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, of course, at the top, Reuters did track down the untraceable Trump supporters the cops could not find, who threatened election officials around the country. Even talked to that one guy. Hours! Talked to others, too. On the rest of the menu, political appointees in the Trump administration relied on faulty science to justify stripping habitat wildlife protections in the waning days of the Trump term. The Biden administration will continue FEMA virus aid for the states through the 1st of April. And that's no joke. And Max Cleland did not deserve what Rick Wilson did to him. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Serbian police detained a local opposition activist for throwing eggs at a downtown Belgrade wall painting of war criminal Ratko Mladic. And Fumio Kishida is set to be reelected as Japan's prime minister. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and Kelly is still quite busy, it being that time of year, of course. So thank you, Kelly, for putting in all the effort. It is, we need it. Thank you. If you would look across the page from the chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the left is the link to our Patreon page. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring patronage helps us pay our bills and continue this powerhouse of resistance against the hostile takeover of the United States of America. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, and if you could send those funds our way once a month, it really does help us pay our bills. And surprisingly, we are still flying under the radar to continue this powerhouse of resistance. And we have you to thank for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and he's busy as well. So thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's, incidentally. And then, after that, I get it posted up on social media platforms like Twitter and others that you know who they are. And, of course, the show notes and links diary, that's where the show notes and links are. And the show notes and links are where the real reportage can be found. So check it out. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Matthew Brown and Jillian Flaccus of the Associated Press bring us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Political appointees in the Trump administration relied on faulty science to justify The stripping of habitat protections for the imperiled northern spotted owl, wildlife officials said yesterday, Tuesday, as they struck down a rule that would have opened millions of acres of West Coast forest to potential logging. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reversed a decision made 5 days before Trump left office to drastically shrink so-called critical habitat for the spotted owl. The small reclusive bird has been in decline for decades as old-growth forests were cut in Oregon, Washington, and California. Government biologists objected to the changes under Trump and warned they would put the spotted owl on a path to extinction, documents show. But Trump's Interior Secretary David Bernhardt and former Fish and Wildlife Service Director Aurelia Skipwith dismissed those concerns, instead adopting a plan to lift restrictions on more land than even the timber industry had sought. In documents disclosed to the AP prior to their public release, wildlife officials said Bernhardt and Skipwith underestimated the threat of extinction and relied on a faulty interpretation of the science to reach their decision. Bernhardt defended his handling of the matter, telling AP in an email that Congress gave the Interior Secretary authority to exclude areas from protection. Bernhardt said the agency's reasonable certainty the owl would go extinct did not match the law's requirement that habitat be protected lest a species will go extinct. If wildlife officials want to change that standard, he said, they should seek a change from Congress. Any future secretary can weigh the benefit factors differently, but they cannot change the law or the legal standard, he wrote. Oh, really? I think that you did, buddy. Officials twice delayed the changes after President Joe Biden took office, and they never went into effect. That puts them among numerous Trump-era policies reversed or struck down by the Interior Department in recent months on issues from oil and gas drilling on some public lands to protections for birds from power line and wind turbine collisions. Zeke Miller of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here on the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. President Joe Biden is extending the federal government's 100% reimbursement of COVID-19 emergency response costs to states, tribes, and territories through April 1 of 2022, the White House announced yesterday, Tuesday. On a conference call, White House COVID-19 coordinator Jeff Zients informed governors that Biden is approving the extension of Federal Emergency Management Agency support to help continue FEMA-backed efforts like vaccination clinics and public education campaigns surrounding the shots. The extension also continues 100% federal reimbursement for National Guard personnel deployed to help combat the virus, including those tasked with assisting local hospitals treating coronavirus cases. The extension into early 2022 is an indication that after premature declarations of victory over the pandemic in July, the Biden administration is preparing for continued COVID-19 disruptions well into next year. A White House official detailed the announcement to the Associated Press in conjunction with the private call to governors. On his second day in office, Biden signed an order directing FEMA to cover 100% of state emergency costs related to the virus through September of 2021. In August, as the more transmissible Delta variant of the virus caused a spike in cases, Biden extended the coverage through the end of the year. Over the summer, Governors complained that Biden waited until mid-August to approve the first extension. The White House hopes the 7-week notice that federal support will continue will provide states with more flexibility in using FEMA resources and the National Guard to support vaccinations, particularly now that more than 100 million Americans are eligible for booster doses and 28 million 5 to 11-year-olds are newly approved for the shots. Final offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is brought to us by Charles Pierce out of Esquire. In 1999, I went to Washington to work on a profile of John McCain for this magazine. One of the interviews I set up was with Senator Max Cleland, Democrat of Georgia. Cleland was a friend of McCain's. Both of them were Vietnam-era veterans, and both of them had come out of that fiasco severely damaged. McCain from having been tortured, and Cleland from having lost both legs and one arm to a grenade outside of Quezon. He had made a life and political career for himself. He was a ferocious fighter for veterans and for the rights of the disabled. He'd been elected to the Senate in 1997 to replace Sam Nunn. Anyway, I was told that I had a half hour with Cleland. After an hour and a half, we both realized we had been going on for a while. It was one of those great interviews that turned into a conversation between strangers, both of whom find the other interesting. He was a big, bluff guy who laughed easily and wasn't shy about making jokes about his missing limbs. I liked him a great deal. Max Cleland died on Tuesday at the age of 79. He had been ill for some time. He had not been in the Senate since January of 2003, and thereby hangs a lesson for our current political moment. In the wake of the terrorist attacks of 2001, you may recall that George W. Bush, installed by the Supreme Court after losing the popular vote by 500,000, had called for national unity in the face of a monstrous tragedy. By and large, he got it. However, his political operation, run by the execrable Karl Rove, looked at the nearly 3,000 dead Americans that saw an arsenal of political weapons they could use in the midterm elections of 2002. Cleland was running against a Republican named Saxby Chambliss, a non-entity who had been deferred during the Vietnam War because of an old high school football injury. While in the Senate, Cleland had voted for the Bush tax cuts in 2001 and for the invasion of Iraq, which he later called the worst vote of his career. But as legislation to set up the new Department of Homeland Security sailed through Congress, Cleland fought to give the employees of that department union protections. And that was opening enough for the rat fuckers to get him. Rove called on an ambitious conservative ad man named Rick Wilson to put together one of the most scurrilous attack ads since Lee Atwater gave Willie Horton his turn at center stage. The ad opened with pictures of Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, and the point of the ad was that Max Cleland, who left half his body in a war zone, lacked the gumption to lead during the time of terror. The veterans in Congress went through the rotunda dome. McCain thundered condemnation, Senator Chuck Hagel, Republican from Nebraska, threatened the Republican National Committee that he'd go to Georgia personally to campaign for Cleland if the ad did not come down. John Kerry of Massachusetts kept inveighing against the tactics behind the ad all the way to his own presidential nominating convention in 2004. Kerry, of course, saw the same greasy hands behind that ad as behind the inexcusable swift boat attacks on his own war record. However, by the time Kerry was nominated, Saxby Chambliss had been in the Senate for a year. The ad was the final nail in Cleland's political coffin. The ad worked. But the ad wasn't through with Cleland. It triggered a dormant case of PTSD, and Cleland spun into a deep depression. When he published a memoir in 2009, Cleland gave a long interview to History.net. It's part of my own therapy, my own healing, he said. Those of us who suffer need to talk about it and write about it. I didn't really have a connection to the suffering of those who have what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. I call it post-war stress, in which you never quite get over what's happened to you, but you move on. But after I lost the Senate race in 2002, my life collapsed. I went down in every way you can go down. I lost my life as I knew it. It took me right back to Vietnam, right back to the battlefield, right back to the wounding. And I had to work through all that stuff. It took me years of counseling and years on medication. It's been several years of just writing. I had to make sense of it all. It never made any sense. It was destruction for destruction's sake, Charles Pierce writes here. In 2016, Rick Wilson gave an interview to Cracked, in which he talked about the ad that helped wreck Max Cleland's career and came very close to ruining his life. The Cleland ad was powerful because it went to his strengths, Wilson explains. Everyone assumed Cleland was immune to critiques on national security issues. We found a lot of votes where he voted the wrong way. We tested those messages and discovered those messages were very effective against Cleland. They didn't calculate that I have no moral center when it comes to political ads, and I will destroy the innocent and the guilty. Max Cleland did not deserve this, and the fact that it worked proved American politics did not deserve Max Cleland. Also, that some sins are mortal and unforgivable. Also, that nothing that happened in the past 5 years started with Donald Trump. Rest in peace, Max Cleland, and may his memory be a blessing. Indeed. Well, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, style over substance. Wes Anderson films have a certain tried-and-true formula that works. Not only do they look a certain way, but Anderson uses a select crew of actors to get what he's trying to do. What has made his films enjoyable are the iconic set designs and unique storylines. In his latest, The French Press, the set designs are there, as are Bill Murray, Edward Norton, Tilda Swinton, and others, but the storylines seem a bit disjointed, and the results tend to fall flat. It's the tale of a Midwestern expat in France who starts a magazine influenced by, if not plagiarized from, the Paris Review. It's not a spoiler to reveal that the founder dies, with his will calling for the cessation of publication. The film is actually 3 vignettes based on articles from the final issue, which blend dark humor, the sublime, and even a touch of action, and vary from just okay to somewhat engaging. Arguably, the most interesting is the third one, featuring Jeffrey Wright as a James Baldwin-type character who, like Baldwin, is gay, black, and an expat living in France. movies. That one even features an appearance on a 70s talk show, a preferred format for Baldwin. However, rather than delving much into this character, this one transforms from a story about a chef into one involving the kidnapping of a police chief's child, including some animation that seems gratuitous. The A-list crew all shine with what they're given here. The problem is that there's not enough dimension given to any of the characters to feel anything about them. The French press is a well-made, aesthetically pleasing watch, but the end result is a bit like a beautifully wrapped box with a generic gift card inside. The differences between this one and, say, Moonrise Kingdom are real characters and a storyline you'll remember. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Heart disease and stroke can be catastrophic. They're leading causes of death, disability, and healthcare spending in the U.S., yet they're largely preventable. Alarmingly, heart disease and stroke are taking a toll on middle-aged adults 35 to 64, with over 800,000 deaths and hospitalizations in 2016. Million Hearts is a national initiative focused on preventing 1 million heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiovascular events by 2022. Coordinated actions by Million Hearts partners in communities, healthcare, and public health will keep people healthy, optimize care, and improve outcomes in populations at risk. Everyone has a part to play. Focus on the ABCs of heart health. A. Aspirin use when appropriate. B. Blood pressure control. C. Cholesterol management. And S. Smoking cessation. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The Last Supper painted the last meal of death row inmates. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The Last Supper art project was created by Julie Green, an Oregon State University professor. Professor Green's medium was cobalt blue glaze on white china plates. Some plates depicting a condemned person's Last Supper are rather elaborate, and others simple, glazed donuts or a single bottle of Coke. One inmate had never had a birthday cake until just before his life was snuffed out. He was given a birthday cake. Another man's mother was allowed to prepare his Last Supper, and the platter shows chicken dumplings with the word mother painted on it. The recent New York Times obituary mentioned that it is not uncommon for a death row inmate to decline a special last meal, and indeed now in Texas, the state which holds the record for the most people executed, the person about to die gets only regular prison food. Julie Green's art exhibit began touring the country in 2002 when the exhibit had 152 plates. Her plan was to paint plates until capital punishment was abolished, or until she had painted 1,000 of them, whichever came first. In September of this year, Julie Green completed her 1,000th plate. We thank Professor Green for her art and the lessons it teaches us. In October, she died at the age of 60. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1887. That was the day that Louis Ling died in prison while awaiting execution for his alleged role in a bombing at a workers' rally at Haymarket Square in Chicago the year before. Louis was born in Germany. His father worked for a lumber mill. One day, while trying to clear a log jam, his father fell into an icy river. Although Louis's father lived, he could no longer carry the same workload. The company fired him despite his 20 years of service. Lewis began to question a labor system that would let this happen. He became a carpenter's apprentice. Lewis then traveled to Switzerland, where he became acquainted with anarchist worker groups. Finally, in 1885, Lewis made his way to the United States and Chicago. There he joined the Carpenters and Joiners Union. He became an outspoken advocate for the cause of the 8-hour workday. The movement had great success in Chicago, and on May 1st, or May Day, thousands marched in the streets for the 8-hour cause. When a bomb was thrown at a workers' rally 3 days later, the backlash against the labor movement was swift and brutal. 8 men, including Louis Ling, stood trial and were convicted despite a lack of evidence tying them to the bombing. Louis Ling and 4 others were sentenced to death by hanging. But the day before the sentence was to be carried out, Lewis lit a cigar in his prison cell. The cigar was packed with explosives. The explosion left Lewis in agony for hours before he finally died. Some believe he committed suicide rather than die at the hands of the legal system. Others believe he was murdered.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 42 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy and rainy conditions. Occasional rain showers through this afternoon with highs around 51, winds light and variable. Rain expected to reach about 1/4 of an inch for the day and night with cloudy skies overnight. Lows in the mid-40s, winds light and variable. And intervals of clouds and sunshine tomorrow with a high near 65, winds light and variable. It looks like we might get a few days of drying out weather, which we need because I need to get my cement walkways coated so that I don't slip and fall and break my neck during the wintertime. We don't want that. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon continue to rise, standing now at 239,055 confirmed cases, with deceased increasing to 2 more, standing at 335. Ragweed pollen is rated low outside the window in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.34 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 99%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 55 and cloudy. Paris is 46 and sunny. Rome is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kyiv is 36 and fair. Kabul is 47 and fair. Hong Kong is 62 degrees and clear. Tokyo is 59 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 65 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 56 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 62 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. staff at Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Serbian police late yesterday, Tuesday, briefly detained a local opposition activist after she threw eggs at a downtown Belgrade wall painting of Ratko Mladic, a convicted war criminal and the wartime commander of Bosnian Serbs. A video posted on an Instagram profile showed plainclothes men who identified themselves as police officers whisking away Ada Korovic after she threw eggs at the wall painting depicting Mladic saluting and wearing his officer's cap. This outrage tonight is the face of Serbia President Vucic's regime. The Belgrade-based N1 TV quoted Korovic as saying after she was released from a local precinct. Korovic's detention prompted protests by dozens of opposition and leftist activists and riot police cordoned off the area near the building with the mural. The Serbian opposition has frequently criticized Vucic, a former nationalist who later adopted pro-European policies, as well as his allies of autocracy, stifling media freedoms, attack on opposition, corruption, and ties with organized crime. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Vucic and his allies have denied that. In a statement, Serbia's interior minister said the police were enforcing public order and an earlier ban on all public gatherings related to the wall painting of Mladic. Henceforth, identification of all persons, regardless of their views about the mural depicting Ratko Mladic, is being made. Mladic, age 78, led Bosnian Serb forces during Bosnia's 1992-95 war and was convicted by the United Nations War Crimes Tribunal for genocide and war crimes, including the killing of more than 8,000 Muslim men and boys in the eastern town of Srebrenica in 1995.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Mori Yamaguchi of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Fumio Kishida is set to be reelected as Japan's prime minister today after clearing the first major test of his leadership in recent elections. Elected just over a month ago by Parliament, Kishida quickly called a quick election where he secured enough seats in the 465-member lower house, the more powerful of Japan's two-chamber Diet, to maintain a free hand in pushing legislation through Parliament. He sees the October 31 victory as a mandate from voters for his weeks-old government to tackle a pandemic-battered economy, virus measures, and other challenges. In the first session of Parliament since the election, Kishida is to be re-elected and then will form his second cabinet in a month by reappointing most of his ministers. In a formality earlier today, Kishida's first cabinet resigned en masse. Kishida had been chosen by the Liberal Democrats as a safe conservative choice a month ago. They had feared heavy election losses if the unpopular Yoshihide Suga had stayed in power. Suga resigned after only a year in office as his popularity plunged over criticism of his handling of the coronavirus pandemic and his insistence on holding the Tokyo Olympics despite concerns of the virus surge. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.